War is as old as humanity itself, but it was not until the first great civilizations arose that tactics began to take shape in ways we might recognize today. By the 3rd millennium BCE, city-states in Mesopotamia and beyond had begun to fight in organized units, fielding armies instead of mere raiding parties. Soldiers carried spears, axes, and shields, while rulers began to understand that battle was not only about brute force but about coordination and strategy. The Sumerians, for example, left behind the famous stele of the vultures, a carved stone monument depicting soldiers marching in formation beneath the gaze of their king. These images show ranks of warriors moving together in tight blocks, protected by shields and bristling with spears. Though crude compared to later military systems, this was the first glimmer of tactics, men drilled to fight not as individuals but as a collective machine. It was in this fertile crescent of innovation that another powerful weapon of war was born, the chariot. The chariot changed warfare more than almost any invention of the Bronze Age. Light, fast, and deadly, it was a symbol of power across Egypt, Mesopotamia, Anatolia, and beyond. By the 2nd millennium BCE, chariots had become the cutting edge of military technology, embodying speed and shock. Drawn by 2 or sometimes 4 horses, chariots carried a driver and an archer. The driver guided the horses with great skill, while the archer fired volleys of arrows into enemy lines. Unlike infantry, who moved at the pace of their legs, chariots could sweep across a battlefield with astonishing speed, striking where the enemy was weakest. Their appearance was both terrifying and awe-inspiring, the blur of wheels, horses, and whistling arrows. The Egyptians mastered this art with particular brilliance. Under pharaohs like Thutmose III and Ramesses II, entire divisions of chariots rolled into battle as elite strike forces. At the Battle of Kadesh in 1274 BCE, perhaps the most famous chariot battle in history, thousands of Egyptian and Hittite chariots clashed in the dust of Syria. Though the battle was indecisive, it revealed the central role of these vehicles in Bronze Age warfare. Chariots were not only military tools but political symbols. To command a chariot was to embody nobility and power. Kings rode them into battle, priests and nobles paraded in them, and artisans decorated tomb walls with their imagery. But their dominance was not eternal. The very advantages of chariots, speed, power, reliance on horses, also made them vulnerable to change. The decline of the chariot came from several directions at once. First, chariots were expensive. Training horses, building the vehicles, and maintaining them required immense resources. Only the wealthiest kingdoms could sustain large numbers of them, making them a weapon of elites rather than common soldiers. Second, the spread of iron transformed warfare. Stronger and more durable than bronze, iron allowed the forging of better swords, spears, and armor. Ordinary infantry, now more heavily armed and armored, could stand against cavalry and even chariots. The mobility advantage of the chariot faded as mounted horsemen, lighter, more flexible, and easier to supply, began to dominate. By the end of the Bronze Age collapse around 1200 BCE, chariots were no longer the undisputed masters of the battlefield. Across the eastern Mediterranean and Near East, their role diminished. Yet, as they faded, new ideas of warfare rose to take their place. Infantry had always been present, but in the Iron Age it became the backbone of armies. Freed from the constraints of bronze supplies, societies could equip far more men with iron weapons. Armies swelled in size, and rulers relied on the strength of foot soldiers to project their power. The Assyrians, for example, built their empire on disciplined and ruthless infantry. They organized men into units with standardized weapons, drilled them to fight in formation, and supported them with siege engines and cavalry. Their campaigns spread fear across the Near East, but they also demonstrated how effective massed infantry could be in both open battle and city assaults. This new era of infantry warfare laid the foundation for one of history's most famous and enduring tactical systems, the phalanx. The phalanx was not invented overnight but evolved gradually in Greece during the early 1st millennium BCE. At its heart was a simple but revolutionary idea: unity. Instead of fighting as scattered warriors, Greek hoplites, heavily armed infantrymen, stood shoulder to shoulder in dense ranks, each man's shield protecting not only himself but the comrade beside him. The hoplite's primary weapon was the spear, long enough to reach beyond the first rank and strike at the enemy. Their round shields, or hoplons, formed a wall of bronze and wood. Behind them, rows upon rows of soldiers pushed forward, their combined weight and discipline turning the phalanx into an unstoppable human machine. The brilliance of the phalanx lay in its simplicity and effectiveness. No longer did battle hinge on individual heroics, as sung in Homer's epics. Victory now depended on cohesion, training, and endurance. A well-drilled phalanx could smash through looser formations, shrug off cavalry charges, and grind down opponents in relentless combat. The phalanx first proved its worth in battles between rival Greek city-states, but its reputation was sealed in the wars against Persia. At Marathon in 490 BCE, a smaller Athenian force used the phalanx to crush the Persian army, demonstrating the power of disciplined heavy infantry against a more lightly armed foe. Later, at Thermopylae in 480 BCE, a mere 300 Spartans, backed by a few thousand allies, held off the vast Persian host for days by anchoring their phalanx in the narrow pass. Though eventually overwhelmed, their stand became legendary, a testament to the tactic's strength in the right terrain. The phalanx was not invincible. Rough ground, flanking maneuvers, or loss of discipline could break it apart. But for centuries, it remained the bedrock of Greek military power, shaping both politics and culture. In the 4th century BCE, the phalanx reached new heights under Philip II of Macedon and his son, Alexander the Great. Philip transformed the traditional hoplite phalanx into a more flexible and devastating force by introducing the sarissa, a spear nearly twice the length of the old hoplite weapon. Armed with these enormous pikes, the Macedonian phalanx bristled like a living porcupine, nearly impossible to penetrate from the front. Philip drilled his men relentlessly, teaching them to maneuver as a single organism. Combined with cavalry, archers, and siege equipment, this new phalanx became the centerpiece of a combined arms system. Alexander carried this system to its zenith. At battles like Issus and Gaugamela, his phalanxes pinned vast Persian armies in place, while his elite companion cavalry struck decisive blows on the flanks. The Macedonian phalanx was no longer just a wall of shields and spears, it was part of a larger, coordinated vision of warfare. The journey from chariots to phalanxes tells the story of how ancient warfare evolved alongside technology, resources, and social organization. Chariots represented the power of elites, dazzling but limited. Infantry and the phalanx represented the power of communities, disciplined and enduring. Though the chariot never vanished entirely, ceremonial chariots remained symbols of prestige, and some cultures continued to use them, their time as battlefield masters had passed. The phalanx, too, eventually gave way to new tactics, such as the Roman Manipular Legion, which combined flexibility with cohesion. Yet both left indelible marks on the history of war. Chariots taught commanders the value of speed, shock, and psychological dominance. The phalanx taught them the value of discipline, training, and the strength of many acting as one. Together, these innovations shaped the foundations of military science. The ancient battlefield was a place of constant transformation. Each new weapon or formation altered the balance of power, forcing societies to adapt or perish. From the thunder of chariot wheels to the grinding push of phalanxes, tactics reflected not only military needs but cultural values. The chariot spoke of kings and elites, of swift raids and noble displays of power. The phalanx spoke of citizens, unity, and shared destiny, where survival depended not on individual glory but on the shield of one's neighbor. Both were products of their age, and both eventually yielded to new ways of war. Yet their stories remind us that warfare is never static. It is a dialogue between technology, society, and human ingenuity, a dialogue that began thousands of years ago and continues still. Thank you for watching this journey through the tactics of ancient warfare, from the thunder of chariots to the power of the phalanx. History reminds us how human ingenuity has shaped the battlefield, and how lessons from the past still echo today. If you enjoyed this video, please take a moment to like it, share it with others who love history, and subscribe for more explorations into the ancient world. Your support helps this channel grow and keeps these stories alive. Until next time, stay curious, stay inspired, and I'll see you in the next video.